Before we actually commence this session, the smooth running of research spotlight today would not have happened. And I want to recognize Miss Amanda Blair, Miss Amanda Blair, for her work behind all of this. The Mico is truly grateful. Thank you very much. So good afternoon, colleagues, distinguished guests, students, members of the Mico University College community, and all those joining us virtually, I greet you well. It is my pleasure and a distinct honor to welcome you this afternoon to the luminary session hosted by the Institute of Technology and Educational Research, ITA, here at the Mico University College, nestled here in Kingston. This series serves as a platform to engage minds, provoke thoughts, and reflect critically on the role of education in shaping society. Today's session is no exception, as we are privileged to receive a lecture from one of Jamaica's foremost intellectual and cultural historian, in that of Professor Clinton Hutton, under the theme, Teachers and the Bogle Movement in Jamaica, 1865. This professional lecture offers not just a historical review, but a timely reminder of the transformative power of educators as agents of social justice, resistance, and nation building. It invites us to consider the classroom not only as a site of instruction, but a space of liberation. We are especially thankful to ITA for curating today's session, and to each of you for investing your time here, whether it be students, scholars, practitioners, or lifelong learners. This is a shared intellectual journey, and your engagement truly enriches the experience. As we proceed, I want to invite one and all to listen deeply, reflect critically, and engage meaningfully. As we proceed, I want to ask at this time, could we give Professor Clinton Hutton a rousing round of applause as we invite him to take the podium and to do this lecture. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Lawson. Greetings. Howdy. I used to be in this place going to lectures over 100 years ago. So like a Miconian, right? I'm not ragging anybody still. Yes, teachers on the Paul Bogle movement in Jamaica, 1865. So we need to understand our history of education, what teachers have gone through for better or worse in this country and beyond this country. And we are using a point in our juncture, in the juncture of our history, to talk about teachers and to talk about education. Uh, well, 1865, that was what? 27 years after slavery was really abolished in Jamaica. Abolished in 1838. The laws for abolition was crafted, the law for abolition was crafted in 1833, a year after a big event in this country that helped that law to come by. And that event was an uprising of over 25,000 enslaved Africans and their descendants in western Jamaica. That uprising was led by Samuel Sharp, and it became a catalyst for emancipation. Before Samuel Sharp, there was an uprising, indeed, a revolution 100 miles away from Jamaica. The Haitian Revolution, the Haitian people would say Haiti, the Haitian Revolution, which ended the trade in Africans. That revolution led to independence in Haiti in 1804. The revolution lasted for about 12 years. They fought for 12 years for their independence. First to be free from slavery, and then that emancipation struggle led to a struggle for independence. And that revolution is one of the important juncture in human history, because that revolution, one of its values was that no person has a right to make property out of any other person. There was no country in the world up to that time that had such a value. And we don't know much about the revolution in Haiti, but it influenced enslaved Jamaicans at that time to rise up against their oppression. One of the defining characteristic features of pro-slavery society, when compared to the 329 years of enslavement in Jamaica, was the introduction of a legal system of literate schooling for the formerly enslaved and their descendants across the island. Listen to how I coined it: a system of a legal system of literate schooling. That is to say that there was no absence of schooling prior to the ending of slavery. Every system has its defense, and we will learn about some of that. But public schooling, prior to that, public schooling for enslaved Africans and their descendants, public schooling for black people was illegal, was punishable. People go to jail and were whipped if they taught themselves to read and write, or if anybody else taught them to do so. It was illegal. And the issue you need to raise in your head, why would they make that illegal? And then you begin to understand about the power of education and the nature of education. As teachers in training, These are some of the questions that you need to ask. Is education just to go somewhere to be trained so you can get a job? That is all that a human being requires? That is what we are here for? Just to get a job? That's what we are? We as teachers have to ask ourselves questions like that. Not only that, we have to help our students to understand that they need to see a bigger picture within which to identify themselves, and not a picture about just getting a job, getting to work for somebody. Should our education system fit us for self-employment, to make jobs, rather than because we are the most important resources in this country or any country. One example, Bob Marley, Robert Nesta Marley, born in St. Ann, did not own any bauxite company. And yet, he is one of the most important persons, not just a Jamaican person, in the lives of hundreds of millions of people across the world. So, you do not have to own a mine and have a mine in order to be good, to be prosperous. You have an imagination, and it is a duty of the teachers with their students to stroke that creative imagination so that you become a sovereign person. You become self-governing. So, during these over 329 years, we have had 329 years of enslavement in Jamaica. And we can't go through that. Safe to say, when I talk about slavery in Jamaica, one of the things that my students always say to me, and this is going back many, many, many years, always say to me, "Sir, how come we never know them something there?" They have always said it. Right? So, during these over 325 years of chattel enslavement of Africans and their descendants, legal, literate schooling was proscribed for the enslaved. However, literate schooling was available for whites, especially those who could not send their children back to Europe to be schooled. Literate schooling for whites was available in charter and trust schools, such as Wilmer's, that was established in 1729, Manning's, 1738, St. Jago, 1744, Rossi's, 1777, Titchfield, 1786, and Jamaica College, 1789. These were schools that were available in Jamaica, but for some people, and signal the tenure of elitist education in this country. And we have not really been out of that mindset, social set, as yet. Because the schools that we have built after that, they are not as equipped as those schools that were built for white people in the 18th century and in some parts of the 19th century. That is one thing that we have to come out of. And to come out of it, we are not saying we must lower the standards of new schools. All the children of this good land must receive the best education. The best. Because our most important resource are our people. One person could find out and create something to heal a particular sickness and quadruple in this one invention the gross national product of this country. So we have to understand the value of human beings, their innate creativity. Stoke it, care for it, incite it to produce what it might be capable of producing. These schools became the symbols of elite access and status in schooling and education in Jamaica, even to some important degree in the 21st century, despite the demographic shifts that have taken place. The absence or the prescription of formal, legal, literate schooling for enslaved Africans in Jamaica for over 325 years before emancipation never meant the absence of schooling and education for black people. You don't have to have formal schooling for there to be schooling. You understand that? And you are to understand as well that there are informal spaces for educating people today that the formal system should be learning from and incorporate. If you do the history of Jamaican music, you will know that it was in the dancehall space from the 1950s, in fact, late 40s, that a way of doing music and doing business in music was created and passed on to generations of Jamaicans until Jamaica became one of the most important source of sonic aesthetics of music. Small country with the loudest voice, with people like Lee Scratch Perry, Marley, Don Drummond, and many more. They had their system of education. So the informal system is important for the formal system to learn from. Because the informal system can enrich the formal system of education. Right? So that even though they did not have schools formally, they had it informally. And the philosophy, politics, and culture of the informal system during slavery never came to an end with emancipation. In fact, it became the basis for critiquing the formal school system. Right? So the formal system and the formal system in the trust schools, Wilmers, etc., and the informal system that people in their household, in their communities, and these were largely based on African philosophical concepts and aesthetics, notions of beauty, and so on and so forth. That never ended, and that became part of the resistance culture to slavery, or to colonialism in its phase of slavery and post-slavery. Black anti-slavery resistance commanded its own philosophical, ideological, and cultural ethos, guiding black existence and agency in the struggle to redefine Jamaican society post-slavery. It's important to understand that. As educators, it is an absolute imperative that we become familiar with such in this history in order to guide us, to frame and to truly establish formally a liberating educational journey of becoming. The primary focus of British education in Jamaica prior to emancipation and after emancipation was on two main issues. One, and we are using some philosophical terms now, but we can get to understand them better. One is the epistemological. The epistemological. You know, sometimes you go to a bar and you see a little, some fence with something right on it. Don't what? Don't piss there. If you want to remember the word epistemology, remember that. Right? So it has to do with the epistemological, and epistemology can also be referred to as episteme. Right? So that's the first. And the second is the ontological. And ontology has to do with the nature of being. Who am I? Who they say we are. And the British had a view as to who Africans were. And they didn't shy away from saying so. Africans, in their estimation, were lesser than Europeans. And they were lesser than Europeans, and they were inferior to Europeans because of what they look like. So they are looking at people who don't look like them and say, well, the way you look means that you are inferior to us. And not only that you are inferior to us, these are ways in which you are inferior to us. You are intellectually inferior to us. You are inherently inferior to us intellectually. You know why? Because you have a small brain and large genitalia. And so your actions, who you are, is determined by your large genitalia. You think with your genitalia. How many persons know Admiral Bailey? Well, I'm not so young now, but I was your age when I was there. All right, it's all right. You know a song? Give me punani, punani. So that's all black people do. They think with their genitalia. And therefore, if they think with their genitalia, they are irrational. And therefore, they emanated from a space in which they term a zoological garden. And their action, their agency, their behavior is also irrational. And the irrationality of their behavior is described as arbitrary sensuousness. You can't help yourself. So, you can't think. You're a natural rapist. And that is why you have to be enslaved. So, epistemology asks a number of questions. What can we know? What can we know? That's one question. Another question is, how can we know? How can we know? And a third question is, who can know? You know, Bob Marley has a song in which he says, they say what we are is just what they teach us. We are the sum total of what was taught by Europeans. And Europeans say that people who have large genitalia and small brain can only know what the ram goat knows. Can't know beyond that. That's all that occupies his spaces, his brain, which is small. And they had a bigger brain downstairs. That's how they say it. And that is why they cannot be educated. That is why they cannot be sent to school. Even though one Jamaican of African descent, for experiment, was sent to grammar school in Britain. And he mashed it down. And after that, he was sent to do mathematics at Cambridge University. And he mashed it down. He came back to Jamaica thinking he would get a work in government. That's in the 18th century. And he never got that work. But one thing that happened, he was somehow allowed to open a school. And from the literate schooling standpoint, he might have been the first black teacher in Jamaica. Francis Williams. He taught mathematics. He taught Latin. And these students that he was teaching, they were people, black children who were mostly freed. They were free blacks. Right? So, what happened? I'll give you some example. David Hume, referring to this person, Williams, and this has a long quote, so I won't use all of it. He says in part of this quote that in Jamaica, indeed they taught, and David Hume was a Scottish philosopher, an economist and philosopher. He was philosopher, economist. He has a PhD, a doctorate degree in the 18th century. And he said, in Jamaica, indeed they talk of one Negro as a man of parts and learning. But it is likely he is admired for slender accomplishment, like a parrot who speaks a few words plainly. So even when the man go and get him training and mash it down, he's like a parrot who speaks a few words plainly. That's what David Hume said. Well-known philosopher in his time. And another one in his time, George Hegel, a German philosopher referring to blacks. He said, this fellow was black from head to foot. Sure sign that what he said was stupid. So I look at you and say, okay, him black, him stupid, man. I don't need to know if I'm going to school or not. I don't need to know anything. All I need to know is to see his color. And once you're black, you inherently are stupid. And George Hegel is one of the most modern Western European philosophers, a German. So, we don't do these things in our institutions of learning. In Jamaica, more than so. And certainly one of the things that we need to do is to develop courses on the philosophy of education. Right? So, there was a newspaper article on the 17th of August, 1838. Remember, Emancipation Day was the 1st of August, 1838. And the title of this article is A Few Hints on the Negro Character. And it came out in a newspaper called Jamaica Dispatch and Kingston Chronicle. And he said, the article said, labor, and this is now talking about the formerly enslaved Africans, who labored for hundreds of years without pay. Labor appears to the African the greatest curse on earth. Nor do I believe cultivation will continue unless laws are made to enforce a due obedience on the part of Negroes to do their duty. So during slavery, you're a menial. And after slavery, you must continue to be a menial. It's your duty to do those things because you're made for that thing. And the contradiction, how can these people be inherent laborers but yet be lazy? That's a contradiction. You said that they are inherent laborers. They can't do anything about it. That's their nature. But at the same time, you're advancing an argument which says their greatest curse is their laziness. And that is why we have to pass more laws now that emancipation is here to make sure they continue to do their duty. The first report on education in Jamaica, and I learned this when I was at Mico because we had to read that book. The book is still around, Shirley Gordon, A Century of West Indian Education. The Sterling report was one of the first reports on education in Jamaica to advise the British government. It says that the report of Reverend John Sterling to the British government, May 11, 1835, it notes that the African-descended population, with its newly acquired civic rights, must remain under the control of the former European enslavers as a laboring class. For without such control, quote, property will perish in the colonies for a lack of human impulsion. The whites will no longer reside there, and the liberated Negroes themselves will probably cease to be progressive. It's one of the first reports on education in Jamaica, 1835. Right? He's advising the British government. So the question is, if people are inherent laborers, it will affect the type of education that you give to them. If you're born to cut cane, what kind of big schooling you need for cut cane? That's what this is saying. If you're born to break stone to build the road, you don't need no education more than such. Mathematics of all types. And the sciences, you don't need to know those things. So what they thought of people that they don't like, people who they live off, who they sponge off, that's how they became wealthy. You're now saying that we can't teach them certain things. And the governor of Jamaica at the time of emancipation, Lionel Smith, gave an address, Emancipation Day address. He says, the 1st of August next is the happy day when you will become free under same laws as other free men, whether white, black, or colored. I, Governor, give you joy of this great blessing. It's not a great blessing. Sam Sharp no have nothing to do with it. The leaders of the Asian Revolution and the Asian people had nothing to do with it. It's a great blessing that we are bestowing on you. Yeah? And they still use that thing today. A former British Prime Minister came to Jamaica and he both said, well, we don't need to give you reparations. We free the slaves. And because that type of argument was known to Eric Williams, one of our political leaders in the Caribbean and great intellectual, who wrote Capitalism and Slavery, among other books. William says, if you read the ideas of European, especially British intellectuals, you will get the feeling that they established slavery solely for the joy of abolishing it. Right? So it was a great blessing. And Smith continued, remember that the freedom you will have depend on your own exertion for your livelihood. And to maintain and to bring up your families. You will work for wages. That's where there will be in life. You will work for wages as you can agree upon with your employers. So he knows that we have employers and we have people who will work for wages. And your farmer enslavers are your employers. Huh? It is their interest to treat you fairly. It is your interest to be civil, respectful, and industrious. Guess what? That was precisely the purpose of education in Jamaica. To teach the formerly enslaved and their descendants to be civil. So when I talk to you can't kiss a teacher. You know. The boss here, look, you have to be civil. You have to be industrious. And you have to be respectful. How you back talk? Huh? You don't know your place. This was the type of education that we were to get. Huh? When you can agree and continue happy with your old masters. So we have people who are masters and we have people who are servants. They're called masters. It's your old masters. I strongly recommend you to remain on these properties on which you have been born and where your parents are buried. But you must not mistake in supposing that your present houses, gardens, or provision grounds are your property. Right? So these people were worked for 329 years without pay. Nothing to pass on from one generation to the other. And that you're saying that will continue under freedom. And you must be respectful about it. That will continue. While at the same time, the British Parliament that passed this law to abolish slavery, as part of that package, passed a law which gave 20 million pounds to people used to own Africans for loss of their stock. And the British government had to borrow the money for it. And the money was 45% of the British budget. And the British government finished paying off that loan in 2015. From 1833-34, they were paying back that loan that they used to buy off. That they paid the slaveholder for loss of stock. They finished paying off that debt in 2015. Right? And at the same time that that law of reparations, which went the wrong way, they also passed a law for a grant. They call it the Negro Education Grant from 1835 to 1945. 1835 to 1845. Of $30,000 a year, 30,000 pounds a year. Not 20 million, 30,000 pounds for 10 years. Yearly for 10 years. To set up education in Jamaica. And after that, they pass it over to the churches. So that they don't have to finance it anymore. Right? So, it was under here. All of that thing was going on. And the people were endeavoring for 27 years to do what they can to be free during emancipation, post-emancipation period. They tried all manner of means, meetings, resolutions, letter to the monarch, Queen Victoria. They advance a view that if we are to be free as black people, then the land must be free also. Liberty of person, liberty of land. At 329 years, nothing. And therefore, in order to establish ourselves, we will need capital. And the most important capital at the time was land. And so they advanced the call, liberty of person, liberty of land. Which never happened. It never happened, and it led eventually to an uprising in 1865 in Morant Bay. Paul Bogle had a movement, and that movement had many people in it. You have a leadership corps, and they were usually called captains. If you know the revival people, they call their leaders captains. That's where it's coming from. And in this uprising, which took place in Morant Bay, the response of the British to this uprising, one British writer who was in Jamaica for a time, Reverend Henry Bleeby, called it the reign of terror. People were hung left, right, and center. In 2 weeks, my research showed that over 1,500 people were killed by the British in 2 weeks. They have a figure of 439. But even then, 439 is a lot of people. In 2 weeks, people were shot, people were hanged, people's houses were burnt, schools were burnt, houses of worship were burnt. That's what happened. Paul Bogle had a church in Stony Gut, and that church was burnt. But our archaeologists in Jamaica did a dig and found out that this church in Stony Gut was also a schoolhouse. And then my research found the name of a man named Mitchell who lived in Stony Gut. And Mitchell was a school teacher. George William Gordon, who was a representative of the people of St. Thomas, then called St. Thomas in the East, in the Jamaican Parliament, called the Assembly. He, in this state, in 18, what was it? In fact, during the period, 1865, noted a number of things. And the ideas to suppress the people leading up to 1865, when they wanted to change the direction of Jamaica. We can't read all of these things. But Thomas Carlyle, a British literary figure of repute, he wrote a pamphlet called The Original Discourse of the Negro Question in 1849. And shortly thereafter, he changed the title to The Original Discourse of the Nigger Question. And this is what he said in part. Not a square inch of soil in those peaceful isles purchased by British blood shall any black man hold to grow pumpkins for him, except on terms that are fair towards Britain. Fair towards Britain it will be that Kwashi give work for privilege to grow pumpkin. Not a pumpkin, Kwashi. Not a square yard of soil. Till you agree to do the state so many days of service annually. That annually, that soil will grow your pumpkin. But annually also, without fail, shall you, for the owner thereof, do your appointed days of labor. The state has plenty of waste soil, but the state will religiously give you none of it on other terms. Right? So this was what the people were up against from newspapers, from philosophers, from political figures. This type of placing them, identifying them as certain type of people. That's the ontological. You are ugly, you smell, all you want to do is be a rooster, you're lazy, you're vindictive, you're a thief, and they actually outline these things, you know. We have documents with these things outlined. And therefore, what they have actually argued is that black people, the freedom that black people advocated is not freedom. The only freedom that is appropriate for our black people is freedom not from their oppressors, but freedom from themselves. Understand that? Freedom from themselves. Right? So, let us on the road to home in this talk, look at some other issues. There were teachers who supported Paul Bogle and the movement. For example, John Edwards was a teacher. He was a schoolmaster of a school belonging to the Wesleyans at Rocky Point in St. Thomas. He used to manage that school, he taught there. He participated in the political upheaval of 1865 in Bath, St. Thomas, and was a captain in Paul Bogle's movement. He was executed in Morant Bay for rebellion on October 20th, 1865. So here, a teacher was executed for participating with his people in what happened. Then there was John Anderson, what we would call a brown man. He was a teacher employed to the Wesleyans. He developed a close relationship with the laboring masses whose children he taught. He said he heard continual complaints from parents who showed him the tuppence, 3 pence, 3 pennies, the 6 pence a day they were paid. He said, can't make ends meet. He said, I met them with tears in their eyes. And they say, teacher, look here. Monday we come out to work, and this all we receive. Anderson's closeness to the people was also reflected in the fact that his wife was one of the laboring class. His wife belonged to that class. His wife was a laborer. And she tells me what she suffered. He was a spokesperson. He and Bogle and other leaders shared the same platform at various meetings. Like, for example, in Stoke Hall. And he was detained during the suppression and received 50 lashes for allegedly delivering a speech at Morant Bay, accusing Chisholm, one of those political leaders there, of the pay, the low pay that they were given to workers. Right? So here we have teachers who were involved with the Paul Bogle movement. But we also have teachers. Let me see. We also have teachers it's not changing. What again? Oh, see it there? Which one? Yeah, okay. So we have, these are some of my artwork. This is on the cover of one of my books. Right? And that flag is a description of Paul Bogle's flag, the flag of the movement that they used to have. Anyhow, this is one of my paintings. A meeting with Paul Bogle. This painting is called The Message. This is another of my paintings, looking at the suppression. This is one of my drawings. This is the step, the remnants of the step of Paul Bogle's chapel in Stonygut. I took these photos many years ago. Bogle. This is George William Gordon. I know he was executed. I think it was the 23rd of October, 1865. And Bogle was executed the day after that, the 24th. Huh? This is Menard, John Willis Menard. John Willis Menard is an American. He came to Jamaica on his way from Belize, because he was a clerk on Capitol Hill during the presidency of Abraham Lincoln. He worked for Lincoln. On his way back from Belize, he went to Belize because Lincoln wanted to send away black people from America to settle there, because is because of that why them have the Civil War. Right? So on his way back from Belize, which was then called British Honduras, he stopped in Jamaica. I think he was, 27? Met a 19-year-old woman. He went away and came back and they got married. But he was connected to Paul Bogle, and his best Jamaican friend was a man named Samuel Clark. And Samuel Clark had a brother called George Clark. And George Clark was married to Cecilia, who was Paul Bogle's daughter. Mix up and blender. Eh? But Samuel Clark was a very important political power breaker in the parish of St. David, Yalasi area, which is now part of St. Thomas. But one time, it was a separate parish. Samuel Clark, for a time, stayed. No, not Samuel Clark. John Willis Maynard stayed at Samuel Clark's house. They were good friends. And Maynard wrote a number of articles for a newspaper called the Sentinel. And all the articles were about public education. Let me tell you something, man. Those articles are as fresh as now. Right? So, for writing those articles, he was detained from St. Thomas and taken to Hope Park camp, the military camp. His friend, who was in Kingston at the time, was detained. That's Samuel Clark. And Samuel Clark was executed for writing, for saying that this letter from the Queen was not true. It was a damn red lie. He was executed for that. Samuel Clark, though, as an activist, went around to the schools because he wanted the teachers with the right type of perspective to teach the children coming out of slavery. He did not want teachers who were too backward. You know what is backward? We have a saying, you know the term cookie, oral cookie, right? Oreo cookie. You know that term? You know the term in Jamaica we call roast breadfruit? Black skin, white heart. Well, Samuel Clark never want anybody like that to be a teacher, because that's not going to liberate the children and his people. And so he was getting these people out of schools. And so the government never liked him. And they found a way now to execute him. Right? Now, there are letters by Menard. Let me see if I can just find. So, yes, okay. For example, in one of his letters on public education, Menard says, the happiness and prosperity of a nation, listen carefully, depends not on its mineral wealth, largeness of population, but mainly upon the intelligence of the great mass of its people. Without the latter, the farmer will forever sleep undisturbed in the dark domains of blissful ignorance. 1865, January wrote that. And in another letter, and this is now specifically criticizing the racism of the public school system and officials, says, it has been said by some who boast of their physiological and phenological research that extreme climate is unfavorable to the spread of civilization, that a full development of the reasoning faculty can only take place where physical circumstances conspire, that the human race is indebted to the climate of England and France for the intellect of Newton and Laplace. This argument may be admissible. This argument may be admissible in modern times. But the experience of history teaches that it could not be held true with regard to the ancient world, whose civilization was nurtured under the benign influence of the tropical sun. An investigation of the physical circumstances would most surely settle the fact that civilization in its highest order is not the result of an innate superiority of any portion of the human race. He was hitting out against racism and showing that history don't bear out what they have been saying, the racists have been saying. Indeed, philosophy, mathematics, first cities, etc., medicine, meteorology, they all started in the tropical region of the world, Africa and Asia. The mathematics that became important to the world never developed in Europe. And these are facts. Philosophy as a subject matter never developed in Europe. Developed in ancient Egypt called Kemet. Right? But we don't do these things in school. And now this brethren here from 1865 is using this to confront the pedagogy of post-emancipation society in Jamaica. Because they were using that pedagogy to make the formerly enslaved continue to accept their fate, the fate that was designed for them by those who exploited them and became rich, rotten rich. Right? So, but there were also people, so that's Menard, but this man, look at him. This man name is Matthew Joseph. Matthew Joseph was from St. Thomas. He was in the courthouse when it was attacked by Bogle's people. He was in there with the planters, etc., etc., because he saw himself as one of them. He was in there. And he escaped. He was a teacher, well-known teacher. And he escaped and ran, he said, a quarter mile away into a fellow teacher's house, a fellow schoolmaster's house. So he was a schoolmaster. He ran a school. Some of his students, his past students, were executed, including one that he witnessed. This man was the chief military man that went through St. Thomas and murdered left, right, and center. Right? And is Colonel Francis Hobbs. Colonel Francis Hobbs hired or appointed Matthew Joseph to read the rights of people who were being executed. Right? Which he did. And then he was also appointed, and he was being paid six shilling a day. You know what the people are earning, complaining about? Three pence a day and 6 pence a day. He was earning 6 shilling a day for working to help to destroy the people. That's what he was doing. Matthew Joseph he was going around, because he was employed to do that, to seize the property of people, some who had nothing to do with Moran Bay. So the British soldiers stole coffee. He was recording them, and then they sold them and collect money, pounds upon pounds. They stole the clothes from people. Those who have watches, they stole them. Money, they stole them. And this man was helping them to do that. And one of the persons whose house was robbed and actually burnt was a woman by the name of Elsie Anderson. I think Anderson was his last name. Elsie was certainly his first name, her first name. Elsie at that time, 1865, had a son who was attending the Mico. And she said in an interview that every shilling she can get, it is for her son at Mico, who was then attending what they call the Mico Institution. I think it was on Churchwood Street, where where Kingston Tech is now, right? Hanover Street. Right. So we have someone from Mico whose mother, because his dad died 11 years before. So he was the only child for his mother and was attending Mico. And they destroy her crop. This woman used to farm coffee. And they destroyed her crop. And when she needed every penny so that her son can stay in Mico. What happened? Right? So Matthew Joseph, eventually though, Matthew Joseph actually had a son who came to Mico. He had a son who came to Mico, and he became a big-time lawyer after graduating from Mico and teaching for a while. and end up in Bermuda as a lawyer. But sadly, he died early. He was at 42 when he passed. Right? But he was a Miconian. Right? Oh. No. This photo, you can see the Mico there? See the Buxton building? But guess, this was in what? This was in 1899, you know. 1899. And over on your right, there's a man sitting down with white beard, like mine. That man, they call him Old Tooth. His name was Lindsay. He was a graduate of Mico. He went to Mico in 1860, 5 years before the Morant Bay uprising. He was a student at Mico. Lindsay went on, or Old Tooth, for old, you know, affectionately called Old Tooth, for tutor. He went on to become the first Mico graduate to teach at Mico. That man there. And when he was a founding member of the Jamaica Union of Teachers in 1894, and he became the founding treasurer of the JUT, Jamaica Union of Teachers, which eventually became the Jamaica Teachers Association. So he became the treasurer for the JUT, and he passed away in 1904, while he was still the treasurer of the JUT. So what we have, and what the literature is showing, the role of teachers in Jamaica, both negative and positive. But what we can say, what emancipation allowed by instituting public education for the black population was for the training of teachers, of which Mico played a central, if not the most central role. And in creating the core of the Jamaican middle class. The core of the Jamaican middle class were teachers. And they became the biggest segment of the middle class. And usually, when they graduate, they became leaders. Almost automatically, they became principals all over Jamaica. Right? And we have some great Miconians who came out of this institution from that time till this time, who you should know more and more about. The role of teachers in this society and the role of Miconians in Africa during the 19th century and the early 20th century. There's the In Africa Museum across there, a Mico graduate who came to Mico in the 1930s. Right? Taylor. Aston Taylor. He went to Africa. He went to Canada and then to Africa, where he was trained, got a PhD in agronomy. And he went to work in the Sudan. And he went across to 20 African countries and collected artifacts. And these artifacts are over there in the Africa Museum. The point I'm making, during this time, such a museum could never exist in Mico. Because if black people are nothing, what are you going to have a museum about them for? Right? So I will And here, I think that's the last image. Yes. All right. Okay, thank you.
So we want to thank Professor Hutton for taking us through the curves and turns of history to get a clear understanding as to the role teachers played. And I want to, at this time, open the floor for questions. Professor Hutton will be willing to respond. Are there questions? For those online, no.
Professor Hutton, thank you very much for that very enlightening journey. Because one of the things I got from that journey is that we, as a nation, we have moved from a framework of black is nothing, black can amount to nothing, blacks are lazy, and we have not necessarily spent a lot of time to get that out of our frame and our system. When you listen to the music, man a dog, if him not have big genitalia, him a nothing. You know, that kind of thing, especially now, hits us in the face, and it's almost like history on a rinse cycle. So thank you for that journey, sir.
Thank you very much for that. Any other question?
Good afternoon, Professor. I came in late, but I appreciate everything that I've heard. One thing that struck me was the idea of we're having us as a nation, we're having teachers coming from this system of oppression, going into the classrooms and having the ideology of the oppressors, teaching the students the curriculum that they had, yes? And the fellow by the name of Clark, John Clark, that was his name?
Samuel Clark.
Samuel Clark, yes. He was the one that the government ended up get rid of.
Yeah, they executed him.
They executed him, yes.
Yeah.
The question is, based with that knowledge, is it that at this point in time in our day and age, should it be a case where we root out those that don't mean our children good from the schools? Just as Mr. Samuel Clark did? Given that these ideologies are being imprinted on our students that would eventually become our leaders, should we root out the corrupted and keep those that are meaning well for the Jamaican future?
Yes. We should root them out, not in the way you think I am meaning, but in the way we teach, in the way we bring knowledge, in the way we allow our young people to think and to pose questions, in allowing them to journey in their imagination, in their research, to ask, to know more, so that they can ask more. And the more they ask and the more they journey, is the more they will find themselves. Because if you don't find yourself, what you're actually doing, we actually do not need the presence of British people in Jamaica for white supremacy to work. We don't. We don't need the presence of those people for it to work, because we have been taught to do it in their absence. So we carry on until we break that epistemological prison or shackle. We will continue to do that. We are 62 years, going into 63 years. We're in the 63rd year of independence. And in the 63rd year of independence, we are telling this year, the year before, we are telling people that, look here, when I was going to school, you see, every morning, the principal, who was a Miconian, the principal would stand at the entrance of the school with a pencil. And each of the boys that came in, he would pass the pencil through the boys here. And if the pencil stuck, he might have to go back home or get licked. Right? So you are being punished for who you are. And when people bleach and do other things, we are wondering why. No, these are signs of where we are, and they are signs of shackle. They are not signs of sovereignty. If they control who we are, if they say, Bob says, they say what we know is just what they teach us. And if that is the case, then we have a farther way to go. In the 1970s, I know teachers were expelled from schools for teaching about Africa. In Jamaica. Who produced Marcus Garvey? One of the most important philosophers in the world of the 20th century. And still going strong. But we do know half of our history. There's a personality that our people develop about who constitute the best of us, the most militant of us, the most resolute of us, and they call that personality Talawa. We have to teach our boys and our girls to develop Talawa. I'm not joking. If we hope to be where we need to be, then we have to rediscover ourselves. The education system punish people who rediscover themselves. I know teachers in the 70s who were, like Telwells, who were expelled from school for teaching about Africa. There was a girl who went to a school nearby, here, with Afro, to do her exam. And she was prevented from doing her exam because she was who she was. That is sick. So in that area of philosophy we call ontology, the who am I? Well, be in man of another. Right? That who am I? It's a question we have to ask and work towards. But you cannot know that without knowing the history of our people. The history of enslavement and colonialism and the struggle against it, and the history prior to that, 20,000 years ago, mathematics was discovered in the Congo. The language of math was plotted in the Congo. Many of people who were here as enslaved people, like some near to a place in Morant Bay during slavery, they were metallurgists, because in Africa was the first place to go that route of extracting metal and use them for pots and weapons, etc., sculpture. We have them taken over here into enslavement, and their craft was stolen and taken to Britain. The way they cast iron, taken to Britain, 18th century, and it became the foundation of British industrial power. So we have to understand this. We have to understand that Africans taken here were specialists in tropical agriculture that powered Europe. Sugar, rice, tobacco, cotton, all of these things. Africans were specialists in tropical agriculture. Africans were specialists in medicine. These things are available, for us. We need to teach them in schools. But sometimes we're afraid to do that because we are afraid that some people will be vexed with us. But we need to know ourselves. And the way to know ourselves is to know about our ancestors during colonialism and before colonialism. And that is how people will weed out them. I weed me out. Nobody weed me out. I weed out myself because I had some belief that, you see all this pretty year business? May I tell you, you can't be who you are. It's crazy. Like how we have a place in St. Anne named Discovery Bay. How can we have a place named Discovery Bay in Jamaica? Discovery Bay? That term is the beginning of genocide of the Taino people. Discovery Bay? And there are many other names, including some names in streets in Kingston. The names are terrible slave masters. So we need but it's an understanding of history. And for Garvey, the number one, we have a book coming out this month, it will launch right here, called Marcus Garvey, Pedagogy and the Power of Education. We have to understand somebody up there. Right? So yes, we don't physically remove people from education, no matter what them saying, no matter how offensive it is. We don't do that.
What constrains the hate and resentment that emanates from the understanding of history? And it's hard to reflect and to look back at even the role of these teachers.
Yes.
It's hard to look back at the functionaries at the time,
yes,
and not see the pain and suffering then, and also what continues, the vestiges of that even today.
Yes.
So what constrains this emotion that it evokes?
Yes. Yes. So we have a number of saying in our proverbs are telling. You know, when your mother beat you and say, you must take telling. You not take telling. Right? We have words we have phrases and ideas in many of those things. Parents ever tell you, say, if you're hand in a lion mouth, you must take time and haul it out. So you have some wisdom, some good, some not so good. but which became the basis for restraint. Fear also became the basis for restraint. Right? There were people who were opposed to slavery in Africa and fought against it. And you see like how they're hunting down people now and killing them because them say they want them land. Palestinians, I'm talking. You see what they're killing them off? Or you see they're killing off African leaders like Patrice Lumumba, Thomas Sankara. It was a European policy to kill the leaders of those who objected to what they were doing. And they still continue to do it today. But we must understand that. So some leaders, rather than that happening to them, they just go with the flow. Some said, no, we're not doing that. And many of them ended up dead. Right? But the world is changing. This thing cannot happen forever and ever and forever. Right? But the important thing, we have to know our ancestors. We have to know about our ancestors. We have to know about their songs of freedom. We have to know about their wisdom in their rituals, in their songs, in their oratory, their rhetoric. We have to know these things. Sadly enough, it is many of these things that have been weeded out of our education journey. Yet it is these very things that made Jamaica known globally. Same thing. Right? But we have to bring them in the formal system. They must become part of the formal system, or else we will remain lost. And it's not everybody that is lost, and we're not campaigning and say we're going to weed out people and put up some sign on people's door and so on. That's not what education does. We have to persist. When we bring this stuff in, people will begin to ask questions. People will begin to ask questions, and people will become better. Because people instinctively want to be dignified. And some people will face death if you seek to expunge their dignity. Because they're human beings. But we have to understand ancestral epistemologies, ancestral ontologies, ancestral history, because those things shape and guide our journey. If we don't understand them, we can become rudderless. And those things should allow us the possibility of searching. Need to search. Teachers need to search. Teachers in training need to search. And therefore we have to get the things that allow us to be able to search for ourselves.
So thank you very much, Professor Clinton Hutton. In essence, I think we can rest on the words of Robert Nesta Marley, which speaks to emancipating ourselves from mental freedom. Slavery. You're listening. You're listening. And to recognize that our classrooms should become that place to liberate minds. So the words of Professor Hutton today should ignite us to be change makers in the lives of those who will come before us. And to appropriately accord recognition and thanks, I'm going to be calling upon Armani Rule at this time to give the vote of thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. For one, I personally found that this was very, very profound, especially because of most of our revolutions, they were not televised. So thank you very much for your insightfulness. So on behalf of the Institute of Technological and Educational Research, ITA, the Mico University College, and indeed all those gathered here today, I extend heartfelt gratitude for your presence and participation in this afternoon's luminary session. First, to our distinguished presenter, Professor Clinton Hutton, we are deeply grateful for the powerful and enlightening professorial lecture on teachers and the Paul Bogle movement in Jamaica, 1865. Your insights into the intersection of education and resistance have not only illuminated a pivotal moment in our history, but have also reignited our appreciation for the role of educators play in shaping justice, identity, and nationhood. To our session's moderator, Mr. Alvin Lawson, thank you for your adept stewardship of today's program and for setting a tone for reflection and engagement. To all our attendees, both in person and of course online, thank you for taking the time to join us. Your thoughtful presence and the depth of questions posed during the Q&A segment added great value to the session. Special thanks to the technical and support teams behind the scenes, the administrative staff of ITA, and our communications personnel who made today's session event possible with a polish and professionalism. Let us continue to honor the legacy of Paul Bogle and all those who stood and taught for freedom. May today's lecture stir us not only to remember, but also to act as educators, students, and citizens who are conscious of our history and committed to a more just and informed society. Thank you again, and walk good.
Thanks, everyone, and our session has ended. Prof, thank you very much.